Here it is, the i30 Sedan N, or the Elantra N, or the Avante to whoever knows it by its other names. I've just taken this on a big road trip simply to tell you what it's like to live with, and if it's worth buying, and if it's worth upgrading over the pre-facelift version of the i30 Sedan N. So let's talk about what's changed. But before we do that, make sure you visit productreview.com.au, because there you're going to be able to read reviews of people who've bought and owned the Hyundai i30 N Sedan, and you can read their reviews there alongside my review. And you can also check out reviews of other cars and even review your own car there. Most importantly, there hasn't been a change under the hood. This is still rocking the 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder motor we've grown to love. This still produces 206 kilowatts and 392 newton meters of torque. And of course, it still has an overboost function, which you can enable on this dual clutch transmission model using N grin shift. But the change you can't see are some new engine mounts, which include a new membrane to help reduce vibration. So the simple answer to your question is no, this does not get more power in this facelift model. But of course, there has been a change to the price. This now costs $52,000 before on-road costs for this i30 Sedan N, but there is no cost if you want to get the dual clutch transmission, because the manual and the automatic version of this car cost the same. You're getting new exterior styling up front with this new front bumper, which I think solves the design issues of the previous generation. This looks way more aggressive and way more menacing and gets way more attention, and also increases cooling and airflow to the front of the car, and also increases airflow to the brakes through the side here. So it doesn't just look better, it's actually more functional too. A big update are these lightweight forged wheels. These are 19 inches in size and they look fantastic, but they actually do serve a function. Like I mentioned, they're lightweight, so they save more weight than the previous generation's wheels, which I didn't really like. These look a lot better, and you can see these upgraded N brakes, which are a lot larger than your standard N-line brakes, and they are awesome. They're also developed in-house by Hyundai. They're not a Brembo set brake, so that's pretty impressive. And also to remind you, the Michelin tire around here is made specifically for Hyundai's N department, as indicated by the HN stamp that's on the sidewall here. And these Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires are very sticky and great for handling. So here's where things get a little bit more technical. So the chassis upgrades include that new reinforced engine mount membrane. There's also a new G bushing reinforcement for improved yaw response and steering precision. And there's a new rear suspension S/ABS insulator on the rear support, which is now made from urethane rather than rubber. And that's for improved dampening and yaw response, according to Hyundai. And so simply put, by making this car more responsive, you hopefully should be able to react quicker to how this car reacts to the road. I had a moment where I had a moment of oversteer on the previous generation car, and that was a little bit scary, and I wonder if these improvements would have allowed me to detect that a bit sooner rather than wait until it was a little bit too late. Now, if you've experienced brake fade with these brakes here, there should be a little less of that with this updated i30 Sedan N. There is now a new ESC program that hopefully should stop overusing the brakes, and additionally, there's additional thermal cooling and also protection around the front brake hoses. The i30 Sedan has electronic controlled suspension, which has been recalibrated with new hardware and software to help with body control, which hopefully should mean a more comfortable ride in a softer setting and a more responsive and reactive ride when you're in its stiffest setting. And while it looks the same, there has been a slight redesign for the rear bumper, and you still get this big wing here on the back, and of course now we get blacked out badges and also a blacked out flat Hyundai badge, and of course those Canon exhaust pipes out the back, which sound better than ever. The i30 Sedan actually has a decent amount of space here in the back, but if you want to put things through the second row, it's going to be a bit difficult because there's a giant red cross bracing there in between the boot and the passenger compartments. But the good news is that there is actually a spare tire underneath here as well. Now, if you're curious, you can actually take out that cross bracing there, but you will lose a lot of rigidity out of the rear. So Hyundai and I wouldn't recommend that at all. As part of my road trip, I had two people in the back, and they found the back seats to be very comfortable, although it's annoying that this is a bench seat, so there is no center armrest that pops down, and when you fold down the seat, you will have to fold the whole seat down. There is no spare seats that will be left up when you fold these seats. There are ISOFIX points in the rear, so you can fit car seats in the back. There are now air vents and 2 USB-C ports in the back, where the previous car didn't have any of that, so that is excellent. But there is still only one map pocket here, and as you can see, these are very useful for charging up bits of camera equipment as well. But you sort of do feel like you are saving a bit of money with the i30 Sedan N compared to something like the Honda Civic Type R, because there's lots of scratchy plastics here, but Hyundai have worked hard and given us some nice soft trim here on the doors, which feels a bit nice. Up front, we're getting Bose speakers. We're also getting two 10.25-inch displays. This infotainment here doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, even this updated model, and this is the same screen setup we saw in the previous generation. We have lots of blue stitching on the inside, we have N carpets, we have N door sills, and we have this N-specific steering wheel with this nice black badge, which feels a little bit more sporty. We also obviously have these big paddles here. We have two N buttons. We've also got N grin shift, which is basically your overboost button in this car. But the good news is that 90% of your controls are all physical, including your media controls, your climate controls, and of course your shifter and your indicators. But we still get this weird flat spot here that's on all i30 Sedan models, which is simply there to like mount a phone. That's really it, and I don't see the purpose because your hand or your steering wheel will be blocking it for most of the time. So it's a little odd piece that's still here on the updated i30 Sedan N. Now when you start up these cars, these processors have not been updated, so it feels like a pretty slow and irresponsive screen when the car starts up. But once we're started up here, we can hit confirm when the car is ready to. There we go, so the system does take a little while to warm up. But what I always do when I step in this car is hit setup, I go to vehicle, and I turn off the speed sign recognition, which is really annoying because it will beep and bong at you whenever you go 1 kilometer over the posted speed limit it thinks is the speed limit, which is sometimes incorrect, which can be very irritating, so I always turn that off. But this is a mandate from the EU, which has made its way into Australia, and I'm still unsure as to why Australian cars must have this, where we actually legally don't need this system. Now it's a typical Hyundai screen here, so there's nothing new apart from this N mode here, which we've seen on the previous generation car, but it's awesome just to run over what it does. It shows you all your information about your car here, even lap timers. This N circuit mode now has been updated with more tracks since I've last tested this car. So that's really cool to see that Hyundai is actively working on this, and you can select your nearest track, which is pretty much every single track available here in Australia, which is awesome, and you can start your timing via this menu. You can also go along here and customize your drive modes, see your G-force modes. You can also activate launch control from here, and you have more performance options for your shift lights, where you want to set your RPM for your launch control. You have your N power shift, which basically surges the transmission every time you change gear. You can turn that on or off, and you've also got N track sense shift, which allows you to have the car detect if you're just driving a bit more dynamically, and the car will adjust accordingly if it detects you cornering and braking a lot harder than you normally would. And also what I love with this dual clutch transmission model is that you can turn auto creep off just like you would be able to do on a high-end dual clutch transmission car, like something like a Porsche GT3 RS has no auto creep, which is something you can disable here, which I think is really quite cool. And finally, you have the most redundant feature in here, which is the active sound design, which allows you to get different sounds like a rally car, a TCR car, high performance sound, and sporty sounds. This is pointless. This car sounds really good. You do not need to turn this on at all because this is not an electric car, and the sound of this car has not been decreased with this update, so I don't see the point of that. This cluster here is really cool because obviously you have your normal dials here, but of course we can go into N mode and it looks far more aggressive, and we get our vital controls on either side, and we can cycle through a bunch of information here on the right, and it just looks great. But something else that's cool is that this car will preserve the engine at low temperatures by making a false red line. So it will bring up the red line when this car is cold, so you can't accidentally overstress this motor when it's too cold, and as the engine warms up, that red line will return to normal. So that is a really cool protection of this car, and it means that even if you buy this car secondhand, you know this car's been doing the most to try and preserve itself, even if someone's trying to drive it really hard when it's cold. But what's most disappointing here is that these seats didn't get upgraded. We have these nice, comfortable sports seats, and they're made of a leather type material with blue stitching and N logos in them. They look great, they feel pretty good, but they're not as cool as the N lightweight bucket seats, which have light up N logos on them like we see in the i30 N hatchback. And that's a shame because we've gone through all this effort to redesign the car. Why not give us those N bucket seats as an option? Additionally, this car is fitted with a $2,000 sunroof facelift option, which I would not recommend unless you desperately want a bit of sun on your head. It's good for airflow, but I definitely wouldn't option this. And additionally, there's been a new universal joint used for the steering, so it should be more reactive and better to steer. So let's see if these small improvements make a big difference to the driving experience. This car's got eco, normal, and sport modes, and I do engage with those modes depending on where I'm driving. I actually use eco on a long highway stint because I did not need all the reactiveness and performance of this engine and drivetrain, and I didn't want to consume that much fuel, so that's when that's good to use. I use normal on daily driving modes just like right now, and I never use sport because we have access to N mode, which is very hardcore, but we have a custom mode, which is far superior to actually using sport mode. I can jump into custom mode by pressing the right N button twice, and now I'm in a setting where everything's mostly aggressive except for the steering, which I've dialed back so it's a bit more comfortable with the wheel, and the suspension has been softened to its lightest setting, so it's good for daily driving. So I can have a really sporty driving car without having to have all the sacrifices of a heavier steering feel and really bumpy ride. Now, the reactiveness of this motor is unreal. That exhaust is juvenile. It is so pretentious when you're doing it around people who do not care for this car at all, but I love it. It is the most entertaining exhaust in the car industry right now for the money. For $52,000, you have access to a car that would normally cost you a lot to tune up and get to sound like this, but instead of doing that all the time, at least you have a valved exhaust system, so you don't have to have that loud, explosive exhaust sound all the time. And what makes the Hyundai i30 Sedan N really special is just the combination of a really stiff chassis and a really nice suspension setup coupled with competent brakes, really big brakes actually for this type of car, and a punchy motor. So if we pull down to second gear, that N power shift is so good, especially in this 8-speed dual clutch transmission. So this has been specially developed for N cars, this dual clutch transmission here. It's an 8-speed, not the 7-speed, and this is the second best dual clutch transmission you can buy outside of a Porsche dual clutch transmission. Now, all this popping actually serves a purpose. Apparently, according to Hyundai, it's a rudimentary form of anti-lag, so it allows the turbo to keep spooled a bit more, but yeah, it's a very entertaining way to keep giving you a lot more power. i30N Sedan isn't my favorite drive. It's very stiff. It can be very noisy because there's a lot of road noise that enters this cabin thanks to the wider and stickier rubber and the lack of sound deadening in here. So for a road trip, it's actually not the best road trip companion at all, nor is any hot hatch, but this car particularly does feel kind of loud on the inside compared to something maybe like a Golf GTI or even a Golf R. Additionally, this is front wheel drive only, and I've never felt that to be an issue in this car because this does offer lots of grip, and thanks to this longer wheelbase compared to the hatchback, you do feel like you get nice progressive turning. You don't feel like you're in a twitchy, darty hot hatch that's in the shape of a sedan. This thing can actually oversteer, which is quite impressive, even though there's no power going to the rear wheels, and when you have to catch it, it's actually pretty good and being able to catch itself before it might go in for a spin. I've hit a few potholes on accident and oof, it doesn't sound that great. Now, I definitely feel like the steering has improved in this car a lot. I like how responsive it feels, and I feel like we've got more actual feel inside this car. Now, this dual clutch transmission is also quite good at low speeds. I'm actually a bit of a fan of it, to be honest. It's quite comfortable and not very jerky, and it does a great job of blending the gears up and down, and it definitely doesn't feel like it's super aggressive all the time. And the revisions to the electronic suspension is quite impressive as well. Out on the road, when I had this car in its most relaxed setting, it did a really good job of soaking up bumps, and if you closed your eyes and your ears to get out the road noise, you would be pretty impressed with how comfortable this thing is. And what's great is that that comfort doesn't sacrifice the handling of this car. I can keep this thing in its softest setting, and it does still feel like this thing will handle quite well. What I'm really impressed with is the responsiveness of this motor. Even though it has a stonking big turbocharger on it, it is just really reactive, and these cars are very special, and there's a good reason why they're so popular with their owners. It's because they give you all of the feedback that you want in a hot hatch, in a performance car, and it gives you all the right feelings, and it also is properly engineered to be quite fast out on track and also a lot of fun to drive on road, all for a very reasonable price. Additionally, this dual clutch transmission mode doesn't get rev matching like the manual does. Instead, that button is replaced by an N shift button. So if you want the fastest possible i30 Sedan N, you need to get the dual clutch transmission version, which is a no-cost option. And getting that allows you to get this N shift button, which provides overboost to the engine, which is a great button if you want to use that to push to pass, and it will also drop the car in its lowest possible gear that it can achieve and give you as much power as it can for 20 seconds, and then it has a 40-second cool-off period after that. But this is where the i30 Sedan N shines. It's in the corners. I'm going to jump into N mode here at the sacrifice of my ride comfort and just get a bit of a feel for what this car can do. It just really does an insane job of being able to hook through corners. I am deeply impressed by that. But here's the thing, I absolutely encourage you to go out and track and explore the capabilities of the car, because at a point there will be a moment where this thing will break traction, and it does not break traction like a traditional hot hatch because of that longer wheelbase. So it is definitely worth exploring to feel what oversteer feels like in this car, because if you've experienced that on the road, it's not very pleasant. But I do feel like even in the stiffest setting, there's revisions to the engine mounts and suspension here. It definitely feels like it's making a big difference. And I love the turbo sounds under the hood. Ooh, it sounds so alive. Now these small improvements definitely do feel a little bit more noticeable. I know it sounds a bit hard to believe, but it does. It just feels a bit more reactive and not as harsh, and a little bit more refined to drive, which is all very good. Now, of course, we have that speed sign recognition, which is very annoying, and you have to turn that off every time you hop into the car. And it seems like a weird inclusion to a car that's intended to go fast, but nonetheless, it's easy to turn off. And I will say, if you are looking for a reason to upgrade or buy this car, this current generation is definitely worth checking out. In 2024, this is still the performance bargain performance card. $52,000 before on-road costs, you can't beat it. But if your budget does go up to something like a Honda Civic Type R, I would pick that over this car. But that is $20,000 more expensive than this car here, which is hard to justify if you're looking for the best bang for your buck. And also, Hyundai is still giving these out with track day warranties too. But if you're looking for the best excuse to jump into one of these, now is the time, because this update is the best reason, and it's a good time to jump in before everything turns electric.